get knocked down, but you gotta get up, keep going.
All right, everyone, welcome to the Sovereign CEO podcast. I have with me today Dr. Julie Ponesse. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Carla. Thrilled to be here. Very good day.
It is such a good day. We were just talking before I hit the record button that the American election just announced their winners at, I think it was 3 a.m. last night. And I don't know about you, I feel really, really good about, very surprised and feel good.
Yes, although I feel like I'm at a point in life, given what we've been through over the last 4 years, that you really have to check your interest in feeling good and say, is this legitimate? Is it safe? Is it okay?
Hmm.
I went to bed, we often go to bed at 8:30 or 9, and I'm looking at the electoral map. I'm looking red and blue. It's all becoming fuzzed over. I'm thinking, I don't know, it could go either way, but it was looking good, but it could go either way. And then I woke up, I think, at 4, and through hazy eyes saw the announcement, and then right after saw that Kamala would not be making a formal phone call to Trump to
Hmm.
congratulate him and see how the voting turns out. But yes, it's a good day. It's easy to get into the mindset of, okay, now do we just need to worry again? When you've been cynical and worried and skeptical, even when that's kept in check, but when you've been doing that for several years, it's hard to break that habit and shift. But I think we've earned the chance to just experience a little bit of relief and some enjoyment of a win that was not guaranteed, not in the books by any means, and be diligent moving forward, but enjoy this to a degree.
Hmm. Um, I love that, just appreciating today. Let yourself just be happy. We can worry and have anxiety tomorrow or the next day, like who knows what will happen. But yeah, I think that's so true. So many people are withholding joy and peace and just waiting for that other shoe to drop because you're right, we've been through the ringer the last few years.
Yeah. Well, and there are legitimate worries for sure. People are worried. I mean, I posted on Instagram today, I think, do we think Trump will survive the next few days?
Yeah.
What's going to happen? And however, I think one thing the election showed is that the force of the popularity of not just Trump, it's not about whether it's in American or Canadian politics. It's not about one person or the personality of one person. It's about a whole shift in thinking, a shift in institution, and that shift won the popular vote. I think it hasn't. The Republicans haven't won the popular vote since 2004 with Bush or something like that. And it showed that that was just too big to overcome. It was too big to rig that. And
Mhm.
that week leading up to the election, where all the celebrity endorsements came in for Kamala, and you think that's a Hail Mary if ever there was one. And you don't have a Hail Mary unless you're really desperate, unless you're really worried, right? And all those celebrities could have spoken out in their endorsements scattered over the last 4 or 5 months. They could have,
Yep.
for them all to happen the week leading up, um, it it means they were worried. And none of the things that Kamala or the Democrats were threatening about, women are going to sway the vote, they're going to convince their husbands, what about the Puerto Ricans? None of that was
Yeah.
enough to sway it. And so I think moving forward, if the Republicans can just stay the course, do what they said they're going to do, let some of these people, amazing people like Robert Kennedy and Elon Musk, do what they're good at doing. Let them do
Hmm.
it. We're in for a really secure time. And I think not to have rose-colored glasses on, but I think we're at the precipice of a paradigm shift. And it's something that we all need to carry forward. We don't get to just sit back now and say, okay, the right Olympian gods came down from the mountain. Isn't life going to be great and easy and
Yes.
perfect? But we can say we have a new era of opportunity, and we can also use it as inspiration to see that good things can happen. We can work hard, we can speak out, it can make a difference. And these people are all incredibly courageous, and we can take that into our own little corners of life, I think.
Hmm. And I like that you said that this is a new opportunity because at the end of the day, Trump is just a human being. Just like I'm going to start off my day with a certain intention, and sometimes I make mistakes. You know, this morning I got mad at my teenager. That wasn't my intention. And then whoopsie, I'm going to self-check, get back on track. The same thing is with him. And I did a post the other day saying, I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm a truth supporter.
Mhm.
I am not putting all of my faith in this one human being. There are many things I like about him. There are many things that I do not like about him. And I mentioned to you, my friend had messaged me saying, like, how could you possibly support this man? And I just said, I see what you see. I see the womanizing. I see the orange. I see the very rude comments. I see all of that. But
Mhm.
what I don't think you're seeing is the good things that he has done that actually really matter. And I don't think you're seeing the character flaws in his political opponent because the media definitely isn't showing that. And I get a little cocky about this sometimes because I was someone that never really paid a lot of attention to politics in the past, yet had such strong opinions because I would watch the media. And I hated Trump. I had Trump derangement syndrome. I would get so angry at anyone that could possibly vote for him or the Canadian Conservatives. And I felt so convicted in my beliefs, but I really didn't know. I really didn't. If you had asked me, like, describe a conservative policy, I would not have been able to in depth. And I'm seeing this happen right now. I'm seeing the comment section, people saying, are we safe? I'm like, yes, your life, chances are, is going to improve, whether you're a woman or a minority or gay. Like, what are you afraid of? And people saying racism won, misogyny won, the Nazis won. And that Nazi comment just brings me right back to the convoy. And I'm like, do you not understand that there were gay people, Jewish people, black people, women at the Republican rally? Like you're not seeing the whole
Maybe even
picture.
more than at the Democrat. We'd have to add it up, but it was very prominent. You know. It's
Yeah.
hard to understand where some of those criticisms come from. And it's also important, I think, to what regardless of what side we're on, to be careful to compartmentalize our terminology, right? It's one thing to be an authoritarian. It's another, you can be a non-Nazi authoritarian,
Hmm.
right? Like it's one thing to be authoritarian, it's another thing to be a Nazi. Where do these things come from? Donald Trump, I watched, I think the most recent thing other than his victory speech from last night that I've seen of him was, well, being a mother, I only saw about half of the Joe Rogan interview, but I guess 2 hours and 45 minutes or something. I didn't have time for that.
Yes.
You know, he's his demeanor, and this has been true when you see him. It's he's very good at spinning the language back to himself, and there
Yes.
are more, I think you might say, personal pronouns in his speech than referring to himself. I don't mean anything gender by that. I just mean
I'm
right.
the
He's talking
greatest that ever was. No one has ever given a speech quite this good. People say it was miraculous. Yeah, when I listen to him, it's hard.
so fair enough if we acknowledge all of that. However, so one thing I would say is that does not necessarily mean you're a narcissist. You can
Yes.
share person, you can be on the narcissist spectrum without thinking that you are the only person that matters and no one else does. And I've never seen anything in him that disregards the value of other people. So those two
Hmm.
things are consistent, I think. You can refer to yourself and speak well of yourself without devaluing other people at the same time. And actually, quite on the contrary, his granddaughter, is it Kia? I think she spoke at the Republican National Convention and she talked about how her grandfather, in the midst of whatever it is, being president, doing one of his 900 rallies, is texting her to find out how she did on the test today. He asks his children, he talks about his children at school. He has love for a lot of people. And
Yeah.
more casually than that, when you see him with people he doesn't know, with strangers at rallies or at meetups. Um, he's not arrogant or elitist in
No.
his body mannerisms. And so it's hard to understand where that authoritarianism comes from. I think it's also worth mentioning that if you want someone to be capable of leading the Western world in warfare, in economics, in healthcare, in education, you want a heroic personality. And
Mhm.
heroic personalities tend to be individualists. They tend to be, when you're courageous, it's not that you have less fear, but you have a different relationship with fear. And
Mhm.
that relationship gets converted by confidence, right? So you have more confidence that you will be able to manage risky or fearful situations, and that can easily appear to be a kind of authoritarianism, or that confidence can get misconstrued. And so I think it's really important to be careful with how we characterize some of the personality traits we see in him.
That's right. They both have negative and positive qualities. And the authoritarian comment, the Nazi comment, I find really interesting because a lot of these cultural issues he's pretty neutral on. So the thing that they really try and pin him for is the abortion issue. One,
Wasn't even that
I
down on this time, right?
well,
Wasn't
and
even.
I understand people feel all kinds of ways about that issue and that it is really heated. One, what I would like to say is abortion is not the most important issue today. It's not. War is. War is. And this individual is someone that has consistently shows that he gets, not that he gets us out of war, but he tries to diffuse war. In his last presidency, it was the only 4-year time period where we actually weren't instigating wars. Like, personally, that is the most important thing, and tensions are high. If Let's diffuse that and then talk about the cultural issues. But as far as abortion goes, it was such a contentious issue in the United States. It was pretty much a 50-50 split. And you had one totalitarian body, you had the president able to say yay or nay. And what he said instead was, well, let's leave it up to the people. So he took the power away from the Fed, gave it back to the individual states. People can vote in their own state leadership. Like it or not, that's democracy. He took power away from the government. He decentralized power, gave it to the state and the people. And I understand that's problematic for some people, but that's democracy. That is the people being able to decide what they want in their own state.
It's also a very strange thing, I think, in terms of the focus or even the nomenclature of the culture around this election, that left-leaning people were so focused on the idea that this individual person, Trump, was going to undermine their bodily autonomy, was going to take their abortion rights away. But also at the same time, not recognizing that the whole potential administration was going to focus heavily on the health of children, right?
Yes.
And we've seen it's very strange also, because there are these mega liberal democratic influencers who, if you look at their 2 million follower Instagram feeds, are all about, giving their children organic food and all the, the perfect diet, the perfect lifestyle. They're doing the Soto method like crazy. They care about health. They just apparently don't want to vote for the administration that is going to broaden the ability for parents to protect their children, because they're
Mhm.
so focused on this one thing that, as you say, he can't even control.
Yep. When RFK said we needed to love our children more than we hate each other, that was the moment. I have shivers now, even just saying that, because the Republican Party in 2024 is not Republicans. It's the classic liberals and the Republicans and kind of the politically homeless people together, united, and they're all kind of sacrificing some of their own personal needs to win against what's happening with what I describe as the totalitarian left. They're not representative of classic liberalism in a lot of different ways. Pro-war, anti-free speech, big government, big pharma, big tech. These are not liberal values whatsoever. And I think people are still funneled into, well, this is the way it always was, so it is still today. This is a Democrat is a Democrat and a Republican is a Republican, but they do not represent the same things anymore.
Well, the former Democrats, Robert Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard and others have said that you think that I have changed by switching from the Democrats to the Republicans, but I haven't changed. I hold exactly the same beliefs that I held 20 years ago. It's just
Mhm.
that the political landscape has shifted.
Yes.
And that is so true and good for them for recognizing that.
Mm,
We've heard a lot about, I mean, RFK has talked extensively in interviews about how hard this has been on his personal relationships coming from the dynastic Kennedy family. And I just saw a video yesterday about Maria Shriver speaking out, how awful the Republicans are, whatever the Democrats are. I mean, he just faces that all the time. Imagine what Thanksgiving gatherings are like in his world. And he's spoken very openly about the relationship with his wife and how the reason he didn't accept the opportunity to run with President Trump originally was because his marriage wouldn't survive it. And everything you see now, it looks like they've been able to manage that and work through that. And I don't know where she's at in terms of her
mhm.
political toleration now, although I imagine she's going to spend a lot more time in the Republican camp than she ever thought she would. But it's been interesting to see how it's not individuals' identities that have shifted. They are stalwart and they know themselves and they've just let the landscape move and then they've made the adjustment that was necessary. And it's
100%.
very interesting, I think, because that means that the Republican Party is so much more diverse. You look at someone like Vivek, who I don't know if he would have been in the Republican Party 20 years ago. I don't know.
Mhm.
But it's, again, so to call the Republicans racist is
Yes.
very strange, right? Nicole Shanahan is Indigenous, and Vivek is,
Yep.
and so you get a diversity of races, a diversity of genders. You get very strong, capable, powerful, accomplished women. You get a focus on children. You get care for the elderly. You get freedom across the board. You get minimized government across the board, and it's just going to be very interesting to see, I think, how this tension at the national level is going to get worked out in people's private relationships as
Yes.
they see it working itself out in Congress and Senate and in the media. We'll see. But
It's all very dysregulating though, because people aren't arguing policies and whether or not they will actually be effective. When I see people on the news showing Madison Square Garden and comparing it to a picture of the Nazis and saying, look, Nazis, whereas, the Clintons, all kinds of Democrats have done big rallies in Madison Square Garden. There are Jewish flags at a Trump's rally. It's very dysregulating to see not just some random person on the internet, but someone running for the presidency saying, look at the Nazis, and just to see millions of people go along with that rhetoric. That is really stressful to me, that is the time and space that we're in.
and I think let's call a spade a spade. I think something that's going to break the mainstream media, that's going to break the internet at various points, is that the Trump administration is very clearly religious. There's a
Mhm.
religious I mean, yeah, Robert Kennedy spoke very openly when he was making the decision to run for presidency, and then when he decided to abandon that run and support Trump, he spoke powerfully about how he prayed a lot about it. He thought it was the right move spiritually. You shared, I think I shared as well, the clip from last night. They were singing, was that "How Great Thou Art" after it was
Mhm.
announced that Trump won. There's a religiosity to it, and specifically a Christianity, I think, to
Mhm.
it, that is a return to so many things that so-called sophisticated people thought we had moved away from. And if we see some incredibly powerful policy changes from, I think, RFK in particular, and who knows what Elon's going to do? I don't know. I mean, that could be
He's gonna
miraculous
clean
or it
up.
could be a little weird. I don't know. It would be either one. But let's just talk about Robert Kennedy for a minute. But if he does some really miraculous things in terms of regulating the pharmaceutical companies, in terms of policy with respect, he has experience regulating water. So he can
Mm,
do this if he wants to, regulating the water that our children are ingesting, regulating seed oils and highly processed ingredients in our children's food and school lunches, especially.
mhm.
If we see policy changes in that respect, and we know that it's coming from a place of deep spirituality, it's going to be very hard to maintain that idea that if you're a religious person, you are unsophisticated, you're dangerous, you're a monster, right? And I think it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see if a return to faith is coupled with what I expect to be some very sophisticated policy changes in the States in the
Yes.
well, hopefully very soon, right? But in the next 4 years.
They're going to come after the Christians hard, and that's going to be painted in a certain way. And let me be honest, there are lots of people that claim to be faith-led people, and you can always tell by someone's way of being whether or not they actually are. Because being like a faith-led person means that you're actually filled with love. And that's not always true of people that claim to be religious. But there's a really good book, I believe it's Fighting for the Soul of Canada. And I've heard atheist speakers, Muslim speakers, many other people mention this as well. Regardless of your religion, when the country was rooted in Judeo Christian principles, things were better. And a lot of people prefer to live in those countries, even if that's not their religion, because when it's done the way that it is meant to be done, it is about loving and caring for your neighbor.
We were talking earlier, I think before you hit record, about how it's, I mean, when you're a victim, when you've been hurt, when you're on the losing side, it's easy to lash out and say mean things and participate in the vitriol and just be cynical and angry. But it's also easy to do that when you're on the winning side.
Hmm.
And we're feeling happy. We're happy that this happened. We're happy that the Republicans are in power in the United States right now. We just say that we're happy about it. We think it's a better move than what the alternative would have been. And it would be easy to gloat about that. It would be easy to say, I told you so. It would be easy to sound the horn. It would be easy to do all these things. But if you imagine what it would be like to be on the other side, how would we be feeling today if we lost?
They're
We would
scared.
be scared,
They're
right?
grieving and they're scared because they believe a lot of the things that have been said about him. They really think he is this totalitarian monster.
Mm.
So, and only time will show them that you're okay. And maybe you can afford food and maybe we're avoiding some war. Only time will show that. But I that is my personal commitment to treat the other side with and I hate saying the other side, it's just
Mhm.
quicker. Um, treating other people with gentleness, which is very hard to do on Twitter. I must say, I have been spending some time on Twitter because I'm censored a lot and it is so easy to get angry over there.
It's the in nature of it, yes. And it's
Mhm.
I don't enjoy spending time there for that reason. I find it's not there isn't dialogue, there isn't
Yes.
conversation in the way that I think some other social media outlets allow for. But it's nevertheless, we need it, right?
Yes.
We need dialogue. We need to be curious. I think the conversation you had with your friend is a good example of that. She's
Hmm.
genuinely asking you, why? Why do you believe? And to reciprocate in kind, you would genuinely ask, why do you feel that way? And so often we get trapped in this cycle of inconsistent facts. We say, well, what about his record with this? What about his record with that? What about war? What about Gaza? What about, and we forget that sometimes our disagreements are not about facts, they're about the values. Or we find that our disagreements are only about facts and that we share the values, right?
Yes.
We We all love our children. We want to be good parents. We want to be able to provide for them. We want to know that we're not going to face nuclear war. And probably most of us, Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative, want those things. We're
Mhm.
just stuck in disagreement about the facts and stuck there, as you rightly pointed out, because the media, in part, has conditioned our thinking to polarize us.
Mm,
It's our job to try to see through all of that, right?
yes.
And on our side as well, we have to be careful, I think, not to let alternative media, pro-freedom media, um, tell us that we're headed for a utopia, that everything will be fine. Trump made a really big error when he was in office, more than one, but he made a huge error, and it probably cost people their lives. And he can't afford to do it again. And I think
Hmm.
it's a good sign that he has chosen people to stand with him that are
Hmm.
not only wise, not only specialists in their respective areas, but they're brave. And I don't think they'll stand by and watch something like that happen again without speaking out and trying to
Hmm.
defend. And we need to do that in each of our lives,
Mm.
right?
What do you think this means for Canada now? I, when I watch this, I think it's encouraging for Canadians to hopefully get involved, but I do have a concern, and my concern is I do believe Trump is going to do what is most needed for America. He's going to put America first. He's going to make some bold economic decisions to improve the state of his country. If we keep continuing down the path that we are, I have a sense that this is going to negatively affect our economy even more. Like there's more pressure than ever for us to flip to a more conservative government, a more fiscally responsible government, one that is able to do business with America. It will affect us, and we have to make sure that we are bringing in the right people that are going to work well with America and its new trajectory.
Mhm. This is such a tough topic. I shared a series of Instagram stories about this morning. Where are we at in Canada? And I have said this personally in a lot of different contexts, and I've said it publicly as well, that I don't have a lot of faith in our Canadian conservatives.
Mhm.
And that is based on track record, and it's based on personalities, what we see. And I think the main difference between some of the American Republicans and the Canadian conservatives is that the American Republicans have an internal drive for courage and truth. And I
And
think
patriotism.
patriotism.
Mhm.
Right? And I think they would be doing what they're doing and saying what they're doing, even if they didn't have the bulk of popular support behind them, because they did before they had the bulk of popular support behind them.
Mm.
I think our Canadian Republicans, led by Pierre Poilievre, don't have that internal drive for courage, truth, or, as you say, patriotism.
Mhm.
However, I think they are what we've got. And I've spoken publicly about how I've supported PPC and Maxime Bernier in the past.
Mhm.
And I do. I like him very much. I like what PPC stands for. All things being equal, that's who I would be voting for.
Mm.
But I don't think I or we have the luxury of doing that right now, because the
Mhm.
PPC does not have a possibility of winning the next federal election. And we cannot have the Liberals or the NDPs win the next federal election for a
Mm.
number of different reasons.
Right.
The Conservatives need to win. We are not going to have a wholesale shift in the personalities of our members of parliament, and so we have to work with what we have. I do think, and I know I'm very cynical about this, that our representatives are fairly weak in character, and that has been a weakness in the past, but it can play to a strength that we're seeing in Canada right now, which is that we have an enormous surge of pressure from Canadians who are just saying enough is enough, and they do love this country. We do love this country. We do value truth. And as we've shown, we're willing to make enormous sacrifices for it. So if our voices are loud and relentless, and our
Yes.
actions follow what we say, I think it will be a tide so strong. Like we've seen, Danielle Smith just got what, 91% approval rating in Alberta, right?
Hmm.
We need that through the rest of Canada. We need a bulk of it. And if our MPs feel that, it will give them the strength, even if they don't have it naturally. But we have a hell of a lot more work to do in Canada than they had in the US because we don't have naturally gifted leaders, unfortunately. Sorry, Pierre.
Do you think the bulk of Canadians love Canada? Because what
Mhm.
I'm worried
I
about
say
is
that
that,
bulk of Canadians, I don't know. I think we have a
yeah,
cohort. I think we have a group.
I think we have a group, and especially after the last 4 years, I found myself just retreating more and more and not wanting to participate at all. I literally moved to an island, and I remember Sarah Swain saying, "That's what they want."
Mm.
And it rattling me back into community and into action. My concern is because we are so progressive in Canada and focusing more and more on identity politics. Let me give you an example. In the school system right now, while I 100% want my kids to learn about what happened with residential schools and history, because I believe in truth, it is all they focus on. It is all they're learning in civics class, not anything about politics. It's all they learn in history. So, our children, for example, get the tiniest window of education to learn about history. And the only thing that we're learning, that we're teaching them, is shame is shame. And again, we should be teaching that, but we're not teaching. They don't know about the political parties. They don't know about socialism. They don't know about Mao. They maybe have touched on like history is so big and broad. So my concern is that many progressive Canadians hate this country and are actually even being told to hate themselves. And I don't think we can heal from shame. You don't go to a therapist and the therapist shames you into healing. That's not effective.
Such good point. So, on the topic of history and education, I'm homeschooling my daughter, and we have a fantastic little phonics English reading homeschool curriculum, but to supplement it, I've gotten a volume of history books. And it starts from the very beginning, the earliest nomads, and goes through the building up of tribes in the Roman Empire and
Can
through.
we come? Can
You
you
can
let me know when
come,
that
you
class
can
is
learn.
happening?
Well, it's so
And
funny because as I'm reading it, I'm thinking I'm on page 7 of a book that's geared probably not at 4-year-olds, probably geared more at 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds. I learned more in the first 7 pages about human history than I ever learned in our public and
yes.
private education system in Canada throughout elementary and high school. But the point you make about, so, they're not learning history, very, very clearly true. And then there's a question about what we do about that. But your point about how the history they are learning is giving them a view of it with a very specific lens, which is a lens of victimhood and shame.
Yes.
It's a lens of the only people that matter in history are the victims and not the heroes. And we're coming up to Remembrance Day on Monday. I'm giving a lecture in Ottawa on Remembrance Day, which has got such conflicting, ideas in mind because it feels like everywhere you turn in Canada, that's the holiday that we're quickest to take off the calendar
Right.
because it's a
Yes.
holiday of heroism. It's a
Oh,
holiday of patriotism. It's a holiday of saying this country sometimes matters more than other ones. It's an explicit denunciation of globalism, right?
mm-hmm.
Remembrance Day has a lot of very anti-woke ideas wrapped up into it. But when you think about history, Remembrance Day celebrates the heroes, the people that were courageous enough to sacrifice themselves for us. But woke curriculum is all about the victims and how the people who made them victims should
Right.
be shamed.
Oppressor or victim, and there are only two categories. You're
You're
only a
totally
victim or only
divided,
an
right?
oppressor. There are no heroes in that story. That's interesting.
No heroes, no, because an oppressor is not a hero, right? An
No.
oppressor is an abuser, and we, I mean, we have layer upon layer upon layer of cultural lies and ignorance and abuse to heal from in our country. And there is a kind of political healing that can happen. Actually quite a large body of literature in ethics about public apology and reparations, and usually it has to do with Indigenous wrongs from the past. But more broadly speaking, we do need, and this needs to happen in the States as well. We need politicians to say we fell down on the job, and that destroyed people's lives,
Mm-hmm.
killed our children. There's new data coming from a Freedom of Information request right now out of Canada that's showing a spike, 75% of women with increase in cancer related to their reproductive system over the last 3 years. People have been destroyed by the COVID, sure, and the response to COVID, but so many things, and our politicians, our leaders need to say, this was wrong. And many of these leaders are the ones who did it, the ones who were responsible for asking better questions, checking the evidence that they were being given, questioning the so-called experts, questioning where the money was coming from. And then
Mm-hmm.
given that all of that happened, saying, I'm sorry, I
Mm-hmm.
can't fix this. And that needs to happen in our private lives as well, right? And we can't control what politicians are going to do. We can't control what other people will do. But part of forgiveness and healing and moving forward is saying, I'm going to relinquish the right to punish for this.
Yes.
I'm not going to punish other people for the hardship I'm in anymore because it doesn't help. It doesn't, right? And I think so many people have regret over what they didn't see over the past 4 years and how it led them to make decisions that have hurt their families.
Mm.
They didn't see that what they were being told about the shots, for example, was so incredibly wrong. Not only were they harmful, but not necessary. And they gave them to their children, and pediatricians spent their days vaccinating children. I mean, how you live with that, how you move forward with that. And I know so many
Yeah.
parents who have so much regret and guilt over just their children being in the school system,
Mm-hmm.
and being there for reasons. There are reasons, there are economic reasons, there are social reasons, there are reasons to do with the fact that the child is used to doing that, used to being there, and what do you do now? But we really, I think, need to figure out in our lives, what can we take control over, right? And you and Sarah and so many people talk about so much, right? How can we become more self-sufficient?
Mm-hmm.
What do we want to give up in terms of what the government gives us, even if it means a lot of personal sacrifice? Sometimes I have this thought that I'm homeschooling my daughter, I'm going to be doing this going forward. There's a cost to it. You have to buy curriculum, you have to, there's hours where you're not working, making an income because you're busy taking care of and teaching your child. And at the same time, I'm paying taxes for our public school system to keep going, right? There's a burden, but
Yes.
these are the choices, right, that we make. And I think, and so many people are, thank goodness, they're finding ways of seeking medical care outside of the provincially funded systems, right? People are
Mm.
learning more about how natural products, regulated though they may be, are helpful, how food is really the primary medicine. We're learning so much more about this and how to, I mean, if your main source of income and your food and your healthcare and your education are things that you know a lot about and you can provide for yourself, you have a much more powerful position.
Mm-hmm.
And your MPs know this, the government knows this, and you're saying, I don't want the things that you're threatening me with anymore.
That reminds me because I was saying I am getting involved more in community, and if you've already gone down that route of separating yourself from some of these things, closing your business, homeschooling your kids, making more money, you then get to be in a fortunate position where you can become even stronger. So I had reached out recently to some of the counselors. I was posting things publicly that like I felt my town needed to hear, and I feel like I'm in this very strong position where I'm like, you can be upset with me. This is going to rattle some cages, but you have no leverage over me whatsoever. My job doesn't depend on you. I've already been canceled a couple times, not scared of that.
Mhm.
Um,
You
and
can feed
we get to
yourself.
just be myself, talk about the things. And, this is the work that is easy to forget about. If we say that we value personal responsibility, integrity, critical thinking, we have to keep on doing that. And you and I were speaking before about what would happen if this all happened again. Would you keep doing those things that you say are important to you? And it's this constant self check. Are you really doing the thing that you say is important to you? Um, Especially after going through what we went through, a lot of us are just tired, and it's easy to let this stuff slip. Oh, I won't participate. Oh, I won't speak out with this thing. I've done enough. And I get that. I get that. I'm tired too.
Yeah, I
But
just came, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead. It's
Well, I was
okay.
just going to say, I just came out of, we do this monthly meetup with the ethics course group I'm teaching, the Hero's Journey, and people in it. We talk about relationships a lot and how to
Mm,
have conversations with people we disagree with and whether or not to maintain relationships or let those relationships go. And I'm noticing that as time goes on, more of them have set higher standards for relationships in their life, largely because they just don't have energy to maintain relationships that pull them out of integrity or that require a lot of mental energy to just talk about frivolous things and nothing genuine or authentic. And this is a good thing. I mean, this is what we should have been doing all along, right? Our relation, if we want to have, if we want to be happy and peaceful and just have that feeling of contentment where you can go to sleep at night and wake up and not worry about so many different things. I mean, there are external things you need to be, your country needs not to be at war, you need not to be arrested, all of these things. But based on the things you can control, you need for yourself to be whole. You need to be in integrity with yourself. And that means that you need to know who you are and what you believe, what's most important to you, and be ready to order those things because you might not be able to have all three of them, right?
that's
Maybe you love your country, your family, and your money. You might be only able to have two out of those three at any point in your life, right?
right.
So knowing what matters to you, knowing um, that what you say reflects those things that matter to you, and that your actions reflect what you say, right? So not
Mm,
being a hypocrite. I mean, that's basically what it is to have integrity, but having integrity, not just in terms of what you say and do, but in terms of your relationships. So thinking about, who do I have relationships right now that are making it really hard for me to stay the course, really hard for me to keep doing the things and saying the things I want to do, and that are
mm,
just draining me so much that I don't have that energy, which is kind of like the glue that holds me together, right?
yes.
And which relationships are just pulling me too far. Is my job doing that? Right?
Yep.
A lot of doctors, nurses have that right now. Am I doing a job that's fundamentally at odds with who I want to be? Never mind COVID or the vaccination issue. But when you are in the healthcare industry and you start waking up to the fact that everything you had ever been taught is basically making people more sick than healthy, and you go to work every day and it's based on that fundamental premise, and the whole system is set up to reward you for doing that and to punish you for not doing that. Talk about your job pulling you out of alignment, pulling you out of integrity. And when people talk about things like, they say, I feel so stressed and apathetic and dysregulated, and depression among youth, I think it tripled compared to prior to the pandemic. I mean,
Mhm.
we're not doing very well. And when we talk about those things, they're often a sign not just of loss in life, but a sign of a lack of integrity. because you're doing one thing and saying something else. You're trying to have your cake and eat it too. You're trying to hold all your relationships together when really probably only a fraction of them are consistent with who you are and who you want to be. So I
Oh,
think we're at a time, right? We need to make a lot of tough choices about we got to cut the fat out of our lives so that we can save the energy for the things that and the people that really matter to us.
yeah. And that's going to keep shifting and evolving. I'll share a story with you. I thought I had arrived at this safe place where, oh, I have my new community and they're small. You know, I surround myself with people that are very aware of what's going on, but they're not black-pilled, they're go-getters, they're entrepreneurs. And I have a group chat with two women that I just love. And they're my people, inside and out. We talk all the time. Now, when I got baptized last year, that added another element where we were fitting in perfectly, and all of a sudden, I had this new element. And there was a conversation one day in the group chat about religion. And there was a moment there and a road where we were in disagreement. And I thought I was in this place. I thought I had arrived in a place where I was totally fearless, would never shunned what I had to say. And I felt this immense fear, grief, dread, everything bubble up in me. And I felt this pressure like, Carla, just be quiet. Don't say you disagree because this is all you have left. This makes me tear up just to think about this. And I thought for a moment, like, you know what, just pretend and like let's move on to another topic. And I decided like no, I can't, and I need to explain what I believe even if it's completely different than what this group of women thought. And I put it out there and we had a long discussion, and it was really respectful and it was really lovely and very differing opinions. And I wrote after. This went on actually all day. Like it was a pretty heated discussion. And then I just said, I want you to know how hard that was for me. I was terrified to write that, and I knew that I needed to. I'm going to cry. And they just said, Carla, we would never leave you. I don't care what you believe. I don't care. Like, I do not care. Like, we will never leave you. And like, how strong is that bond now, knowing that you can agree, or sorry, can disagree and be with people? Because that also started happening to many of us in the last few years. You know, we saw it with the Middle East war, right? All of a sudden, there were lots of people that were tight, and then that was being fractured all over the place, and everyone was attacking one another. And I was like, guys, we don't have to be this monolith either. We don't need to be attacking one another. But yeah, that was a big moment to be tested.
It's a hard thing thinking about what are my core commitments and what do I do with those core commitments when it comes to relationships? Because it's easy to say, well, you can only have deep, genuine relationships with people that share your basic beliefs. That's
Mhm.
easy to say, right? And then you could just do something like get a lanyard and put your core beliefs on it and walk around in the world and match up lanyards and no, they're repelled or ding, 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 and there you go.
Mhm.
But that isn't really that doesn't reflect the reality of human relationships, because very often we're very drawn to people who have differences of opinion right now, right? I have found that too with the war in the Middle East, with the topic of abortion, that within the freedom community, if we're calling it that, we're all so awake to what's going on in the world in terms of media and global power and healthcare, the judiciary, but then we bump up into disagreement over some of these other issues. And people have even said to me, "You're an ethics professor. How come you're not speaking out about Gaza?" Unfollow, right?
Right.
And I'll say to them, "I'm not speaking out about Gaza because I'm not a Middle East expert and I've never been there. And the only information I have about it is secondhand, mainly from mainstream media. So do you really want my expert opinion on that?"
Hmm.
Right? And still unfollow.
Yeah.
But I think there's a question about, and this is an individual question. It's a question that each person has to settle on, which is what can I tolerate and what can I not tolerate. So if
Hmm.
you had said to your friends, not I'm a Christian, but I enjoy eating babies in my spare time, that might have been a core belief that they couldn't tolerate, as a
Yeah, I hope
hyperbolic
so.
example.
I hope so.
And you hope so, right? So if they didn't balk at that, if they said, it's all right, Carla, we love you, you might
Hmm.
think, huh, who have I chosen as my friends, right? But thinking deeply about, we talk about this in our course a lot about the different kinds of relationships there are. And there are relationships of utility that range from anything like the relationship you have with your mechanic, which is just you fix my car, I give you money, maybe we exchange pleasantries. Even relationships with professionals, that's a more sophisticated, more personal relationship of utility, but still. And then you get to relationships of genuine friendship or relationships of virtue, where you love each other for their own sake, right?
Mm.
And there needs to be something about that person that you're loving. And what is a person other than his or her deep set of commitments and beliefs? And so the point you make is an interesting one. If those shift over time, it's not unreasonable, I don't think, for relationships to shift with them, for relationships to break even, because, and we saw that over the last several years, that, I lost relationships because my fundamental core beliefs about the world changed. I don't read The Atlantic or The Economist anymore, even though as an academic I was supposed to, right?
Yeah.
So that core belief changed about the world, and that was unacceptable to people that used to be friends of mine. Um, but even just being in this position of being poised, where we go out into the world now and we're not just believing whatever we're told, but we're curious, we're exploratory, we're open. We are, I think, more comfortable. We were talking about risk earlier. We're more comfortable with risk than we were. Um, Myself, I feel like I did something in my life that was very scary and it took a lot of courage. But having done it makes me feel like I could take on other things that are fearful and risky more than I thought I could, because you realize that your fear of the alternative is worse,
Mm.
right? So for anybody who's listening, if you're thinking, I want to speak out, but I just can't because I'm afraid, well, imagine what will happen if you don't? What could happen if you don't? And
Hmm.
aren't you more afraid of that reality? Right?
Yes.
And aren't you afraid of getting to the end of your life and all you're left with is a bunch of what ifs and I could have's and I wish I had's? And don't you want to live your life as this fully actualized person who does everything you want to do within reason, right? You
Hmm.
actualize who you really are, you put your beliefs out into the world, and then your life is over. You think, but I did the best that I could. Every day I did the best that I could, and I made mistakes, and then I looked back and I fixed them and I said, I'm probably going to make mistakes in the future, but I won't make that mistake again.
Mm. And doing the best that you can, that's not a landing spot. That is something that is evolving and shifting depending on the circumstance. Like if I think about going through all of this again, would I do the same thing? Would you do the same thing? Well, if the consequences were the same, yes. But what if the consequences are different? This podcast, for example, and some of the laws that we are looking at, the hate speech laws and the censorship laws, I've asked myself a lot, and I've talked to my husband about this. There could be a time where what I'm doing is actually dangerous, not just canceled, not just losing friends and my work, but what if I went to prison for this podcast? Would I still do it? I don't know. It's not an obvious yes or no. I'm also a mother. I want to say yes, truth no matter what, and I'll happily go to prison. I don't know. I'm still doing it now. What about yourself? If these laws continue, if there are dire consequences now to speaking up, what would you do?
The calculus is so complicated, isn't it? As you say, you're a mother. You don't want to, you have responsibilities to your child. You don't want to leave a child alone in this world without anyone to fend for him or her. And you don't want your sacrifice to be meaningless, right? So if you go to prison for a podcast and that prevents you from being able to speak or act in any other way ever, that we certainly have had heroic Sophie Scholl in the past. She faced the guillotine at, was she 24 or 21, for distributing anti-Nazi propaganda. We
Hmm.
know of her, we're inspired by her. Should she have done that? I don't know.
Hmm. I have a good example during the pandemic too. I had a very good friend that had a yoga studio, and she was the last one to implement mandates. She was locked in a 6-year lease, a very expensive building. She was the last one to put them in, and eventually she did. And a lot of people gave her a really hard time. Meanwhile, she was smuggling people in the whole time. Anyone that wanted to come, she let in. And she's this brilliant individual, I hope she's listening, who
Mhm.
the whole time was running yoga teacher trainings that dismantled people's thinking around so many of these cultural issues, the identity politics. She essentially was running yoga teacher trainings that were waking everybody up. And some people in the freedom community would give her such a hard time. I can't believe you did that. I can't believe you weren't just like on the street with a sign. And why? Because actually, what she did was so much more powerful. And if she had just done that and burned her bridges, she just would have ended up bankrupt. The studio would have been closed. She never would have continued to run these trainings, waking up so many people. And I reminded her during the Nazi time period too. Most people were not on the side of the street with billboards saying, let's take down the Nazis. They would have been shot. What were they doing? They were smuggling people into the attic. That's exactly what you were doing.
It's beautiful. Yeah, martyrdom isn't always patriotic. It isn't always effective. It isn't always, I think, ethical or survivalist,
Hmm.
And we would be blind not to think that we're going into a difficult period. We've gone through a difficult period in Canada, but things I think have the potential to be even more volatile in the US because our wokeism is more deeply cultural, I think. It's more woven in more intricate ways throughout our history, which is much shorter. I mean,
Hmm.
America is the oldest democracy in the world. We're relatively new to it, and I think we're on more like toddler footing when it comes to it. And we've had a lot of very woke leaders. Not that the US hasn't, but I think our patriotism is more, it's more juvenile in a way, and it's more delicate and fragile. And every day we're becoming, our identity is shifting because, if for nothing else, the massive influx of people from other places with very, very different cultural ideas. And I don't, I've never personally bought into the idea that a country's identity can be multicultural
Mm,
because it's
same.
it's a non-identity. Then you need to have
Yes.
something. You can't just have diversity as an identity. So identity politics is just wrong-headed from the beginning, right? You need to be able to define something. You need to have something that's in common. I mean, the Americans have freedom and liberty, right? And I think we're going to have a hard time moving forward unless we make a similarly strong commitment to the same kinds of values.
That's a big problem that we're facing right now with mass immigration. I'm for immigration, but mass immigration, that idea that diversity is our strength, that's not true. That will weaken us if there's not some sort of shared identity as Canadians. And as Canadians, this is what we believe. Even in India, I believe there's 13 different languages and cultural groups within the country, but they all speak English as the tie that brings them all together. And there is a distinct Indian culture. And people think that's a racist idea that that we have to embrace all cultures. And no one's saying that you can't keep your language. What we're saying is there needs to be a unifying factor. And I've spoken to some really interesting individuals that have actually immigrated here to Kenora who did it through the normal pathways, who did it legally. And they're so mad at this new trend of people quickly coming over and they're not assimilating and they're staying in their groups. And this one individual is telling me, I left India because I wanted to become Canadian. And he said a lot of the people that are coming over are giving us a bad name and they're not assimilating. And this is going to cause huge issues. And anyone that doesn't believe that, the easiest example is looking at something like Sharia law, for example. That does not mesh with Western culture, a progressive culture. Sharia law, where women are beaten in the streets and gay people are killed, that does not mesh with progressive Western culture at all. So we have to be able to have have the courage to say, no, no, no. As Canadians, we believe this, which is expected if you were to move to any other country, right? You would speak a certain language and assimilate to certain cultural things, but we don't do that in Canada at all.
I think we're afraid. I mean, as soon as you make a claim, a positive claim towards some common trait or belief, then you are at that moment denying all the things that conflict with it. And that sounds divisive and derogatory and discriminatory. But the thing is, you can't live without being discriminatory, right? It's not bad to make choices. It's not bad to say that some beliefs are better than other ones because some beliefs more closely track the truth. Some beliefs are more respectful of humanity, like not killing women in the street. It's
Hmm.
just objectively better for women's lives that they not be killed in the street, right?
Hmm.
And we need to stop being so worried about respecting the cultural significance of that belief system that we fail to protect women, right? It's our
Hmm.
tolerance has become intolerant, right?
Hmm.
We've gotten to the point where we're afraid to believe anything or say anything. And to come back to my point earlier about not believing in the convictions of our leaders, I think this is at the root of the problem because not only are they deeply meshed in the culture of their political, their environment, but they've been raised in the school system. They're conditioned to believe that you ought not say certain things because it will alienate someone. Well, it's not possible to be a convicted person, to be, to be a person with conviction. It's not possible to have character without alienating someone, and that's not a bad thing. It's not bad to make choices. It's not bad to follow truth. It's not bad to have disagreement. A couple of years ago, I had the good fortune of interviewing Stockwell Day, and he was talking about how different it was when he was an MP and how he'd sit next to a Liberal or an NDP in the House of Commons, and they would disagree about some fiscal policy or whatever it was, and then they'd go to lunch afterwards because
Mm.
they understood that you could disagree and that you could still see each other's humanity. And it just isn't like that anymore.
No.
We Whatever we decide on, our love for the country and each other, back to that RFK idea, our love for our country needs to be stronger than our hatred for all the differences. And
Hmm.
I don't think we're there yet. And I don't think it's going to come top down from our leaders. It needs to come from us. And they have a much better chance of modeling it in the political sphere in the House of Commons and how they relate to each other and the verbiage they use in the media if they can see it in their constituents, if they
Mm.
see how we're dealing with conflict, as a mother at city council or talking to the media or what's going on in podcasts like this. They need to be able to see that we can talk about things and not hate each other because of it.
Yes. Well, one thing that will be really positive for Canada, and I'm so grateful for, if Kamala won then I think our government would have been looking at that and the tactics. And I don't doubt for one second that they would have repeated, the no voter ID, the bringing in illegal immigrants to swing states. Um, if that had worked, manipulation of media, using the Hollywood celebrities, I don't doubt for a second that our liberals would have duplicated that. So I was thrilled to see that even with all of that, it didn't work. So I hope our liberal government is watching that. And I hope they're scared, that they're realizing that people are waking up. And despite the media propaganda, people are able to see through that, and they don't want this anymore. They don't want woke culture. They want common sense policies. And yeah, I hope they're really scared right now.
Is it possible? Let me say, I hope that we're scared but confident in our own abilities. And I hope we are done with our era of outsourcing everything,
Hmm.
information, advice, responsibility for our lives to the government and the institutions that tell us they've got it, because they don't, they haven't, we're better off on our own. And it's time for us to tell government what they can do for us and not the other way around. We're not subjects. We
Hmm.
went through that whole thing. We're not subjects anymore. We're citizens. And there are not just rights. We talk in Canada a lot about rights to citizenship, but there are
Yes.
responsibilities too. And some of those responsibilities include speaking up when things get tough, making sacrifices when we don't want to, moving out of our 5-bedroom home in order to make sacrifices to provide for our children and raise them in the way that we want. This is what the people are doing now. People are moving, they're getting rid of their luxury lifestyles and going and finding ways to be self-sustaining. And they're the people that are happy and confident and healthy. And it's possible. They're showing us that it's possible. And I think that we just need that idea to catch on and more people to see that it's possible and to join communities where there's support and to get education, and
Mm.
we'll be okay. And hopefully some of the Americans can protect us while we sort ourselves out. Is my hope, my Hail Mary hope.
Oh, me too. Julie, tell me about your community. You have a community, you have an ethics course. This might, I think I saw a post of yours lately too, in speaking to how do you actually stay convicted in your values long term? And you said it's who you surround yourself with.
Hugely. Well, people's reference group. So your reference group is the people that you primarily compare yourself to. And that could be real people, it could be friends, it could even be fictitious people. I mean, if you don't have friends and you're just reading books and watching movies, whoever you compare yourself to, that's the single biggest predictor of what you will do in your life. So surrounding yourself with the right people and not surrounding yourself with the wrong people is the biggest thing you can do to become the person you want to be. So I created, I mean, I've taught probably 30, 35 different ethics classes at universities in Canada and the US, and I don't do that anymore, but that's my background. And one of the things I learned coming out of that and getting perspective about the real world is that probably something like 80% of what academic ethics does, what it writes about, what it tells us, is just wrong. It's out of step with how people live our lives. Most of it is about what you should do. What's the right thing to do?
Mm.
Turns out most people don't care about that question because they already know what the right thing to do is, or they believe they know what the right thing to do is. And it's very hard to convince someone otherwise once you have that belief. What we struggle with is acting on our beliefs. And so I built a course called The Hero's Journey. It's a 6-month subscription model. So you get a new chapter dropped each month that taps into a different part of the classical hero's journey. So taking up the call, setting your compass, dealing with obstacles along the way, dealing with relationships. And we're trying to help people learn how to set up your life so that you have conviction, so you can act on your conviction. So the first exercise that everybody's asked to do is to envision and write out what you think someone would give as the eulogy at your funeral. What would they say about you, looking back on you?
Mm.
And then you're asked to write out your ideal eulogy. What do you wish they had said? And then you compare the two. And that's a really powerful portal into thinking about who do you want to be? and getting some character traits out of that ideal vision for your life. And then we build the whole course based on those character traits that you identify and help the members. We currently have almost 75 members, help them figure out how to come into alignment with those beliefs. And as though that wasn't good enough for its own sake, what you find is that people then have less stress, more contentment, more peace, lower blood pressure, less friction in their relationships, and all of a sudden life just starts to sort itself out, and you start living what you consider to be the good life. So it's really thrilling. It feels so much more meaningful and real than anything I ever taught at university. And I'm so grateful for those years, because I'm able to pick now what I think are the best articles, the best studies in experimental psychology, the best from the history of philosophy and ethics that can help us understand how to live well, but I'm not tethered to it anymore. And I think we're building a really beautiful picture of what life can be like, and a really beautiful community. And people are starting to form relationships. We just had a couple meet up in real life, so they're friends in real life now. That's just music to my ears. So
I love when that happens. Oh, I love the starting point. And then you have a community not to call you out, but to call you up.
absolutely, absolutely. So the community is becoming the members' reference point. So it's filling in some gaps in their lives where they find, they've lost a lot of relationships over the last 4 years. They're feeling lonely, they're feeling unsupported, they're feeling at odds with people who just don't resonate with them. And in this community, they're finding that, wow, I had the same kind of conversation last week. I have the same sort of problems. I see what you did. Oh, what you said there really helped me. And it's supportive. It's amazing. Just, you don't need to fix someone's problems always. You just need to show them that you see them and that support is there. And that just goes so far to helping.
Mm. Julie, thank you so much for your time today. You were one of those people for me, right out of the gates, definitely embodying everything that you preach. And I'm sure it was hard at the time, but man, did you just seem unshakable from this side. And I know you inspired a lot of people to be brave, to be courageous, to do the right thing, say the right thing, and you're still deep in that work today.
Very deep, not giving it up anytime soon, but thank you. Always having beautiful conversations is one of the most human things we can do. And I think whatever we decide upon that defines ourselves as Canadians, wouldn't it be great if we were known as like the best place in the world where you could have open, beautiful conversations? I used to think that, and I think we can get back to that again.
So too. Where can people find your course?
So I have a website, julieponesse.com. On Twitter and Instagram, I'm Dr. Julie Ponesse. And if you go to the website and scroll about halfway down, you'll find information about the hero's journey. You can click there. It's $69 a month for 6 months. And then when the 6 months is up, you can stay in the community for a smaller fee.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'll
Thanks,
be
Carl.
keeping my eyes out for the course. We'll make sure that we link everything in the show notes for the listeners. And yeah, again, thank you so much for this conversation. And I'm going to continue closely following your work.
Thanks, Carla.
Been underground, now I aim for the sky. Don't quit now, you can last longer. All these wounds only making you stronger. Don't